Welcome to today's Tech Solutions session, 2020 Strong, how global campus recruiters plan to hire now and in the post-pandemic future. It is my pleasure to turn it over to our session presenters.
Thank you very much, Nace, for giving us this opportunity to speak. I'm just transitioning between screens. You can see a little bit of multitasking. My name's Nicky Garcea, and I'm one of the co-founders of Cappfinity. We're a global organization set up 15 years ago, providing talent tech solutions to global recruiters and also strengths-based solutions to campus and universities globally. I'm very much privileged to be joined by Lindsey Pollak and my colleague, Jeannie Lacaris, who are going to present themselves shortly and introduce themselves to you. But firstly, I'd just like to thank Nace. Great to be able to still present at these unusual times. We were looking forward to giving a presentation at the conference in June, and I'm very new to Nace, so treat me gently. I went to the conference in Orlando for the first time last year. I attended all of the newbie NACE networking events. Davon did a great job at onboarding me so I could connect with everybody. And I know many of you are members for many years, as are my esteemed colleagues. So Lindsey and I today really want to share with you our research findings, but also our actions that come from work that we have been collaborating on together now for a number of months. A collaboration that started actually at the start of a pandemic. So I think it's fair to say we've become pretty firm friends over this time as well. And it was very much a piece of research with this emphasis on 2020 Strong. And I'll go on to share with you kind of what that meant to us. In terms of what we're going to cover today, I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview to the project. Lindsey and I are going to alternate and share key themes in a verbatim fashion. We won't share any names of the individuals that are involved. It was completely anonymous research, but you will hear the voices of the individuals. We're going to talk about really actionable ideas that you would be able to take away. And for those of you who are dialing in from campuses and universities, you'll hear of things that the recruiters are doing to really prepare candidates. And then over to you, a session that Jeannie will facilitate, Q&A to Lindsey and I, as many questions as possible. We're really happy to take them and hear them. So in terms of the project team, myself, I'm the Chief Customer Officer at Cappfinity and a background in IO psychology, and have for really the last decade been working in service of taking solutions to the market which will allow a leveling in the playing field. One of our missions at Cappfinity is to strengthen the world, and it felt very much at the start of the pandemic that we needed to get this research done and we needed to get this research out there. I'll let Jeannie and Lindsey introduce themselves so you can hear a little bit more about the team.
Thank you, Nicky. Jeannie Lacaris, it is an absolute honor and privilege to be a part of today's session. I've been with NACE, a member for the last 15 years in various capacities. And I actually shared with the group before we started, my necklace today is actually from one of my first NACE conferences back in Anaheim in 2005 or 6. And so it really feels great to be just part of the organization and to be part of Cappfinity now, where we're going to support employers and early talent in really understanding how to leverage and leverage their strengths in a new world. So on to you, Lindsey.
Thanks, Jeannie. Hi, everybody. My name is Lindsey Pollak. I'm an independent consultant and author of 3 books, currently working on a 4th. I'm so privileged and pleased to partner with the team at Cappfinity. I admire their work, and we really had an opportunity to do some very timely research. I'm also a longtime NACE member and multiple-time proud presenter, and I'm just so happy to be here virtually with all of you.
Thank you, team. And extending beyond this team, we had much of our kind of research science by Cappfinity CEO Alex Linley, and also a lot of input by Trudy Steinfeld, our strategic advisor and good friend and fellow of NACE. So in terms of our project goals, there were really three things that we set out to explore. And the first was to explore the campus recruitment landscape in this unique time by learning from the collective wisdom of the organisations across industries and region. And the region piece was key to us. We really wanted to be able to understand with our client base globally what was impacting different clients at different points during the pandemic. Secondly, we wanted to identify opportunities to strengthen recruitment practice and candidate outcomes now and in the future. And I think we've got some really interesting learning that has come from the research in terms of what people did do and hope to do as they go forward. And then third, and this I think at these times has probably become one of the most powerful things, to try and change the negative narrative that has emerged and continues to emerge and offer solutions around the employment fate of the class of 2020. And I think Lindsey and I would say the employment fate of class of 21 and 22 as well. That's become very apparent from our dialogue with people. So in terms of the methodology that we conducted, it was all qualitative research conducted from May to June, and there were 34 people interviewed across these sectors. And we had about 6 countries involved at this time. Over 100 hours of interview. Lindsey's been incredibly busy coding and analysing, really interesting coming out from that coding and analysing 2 really powerful themes that I want Lindsey to share before we go into the themes of the research.
Thank you, Nikki. So as Nikki introduced, we have many, many findings to share with you, but there are 2 really powerful, very clear themes that came out of these global interviews. And the first is certainly not surprising, but I think worth calling out, both due to the pandemic and the increased and very important attention to racial justice, particularly in the United States, but spreading globally. And the first was that rapid agility, that people had absolutely no choice but to pivot instantly and quickly to various issues. So what we want to share is a couple of the exact verbatim quotes as Nikki introduced, but everyone we spoke to is planning to recruit virtually in the fall, and many had to plan immediately for their summer internship programs and how to handle those virtually as well. So here's one of the quotations. With my recruiting team, I've been saying we have to stay nimble. There isn't a right answer to anything we're doing. There was almost a feeling of innovation, but also creativity, because nobody knew the right way to approach this pandemic and so many things that happened after. Here's another quotation that says something similar. There's no playbook or rules of the road, and some ideas we're going to try won't work. If you're not okay with that, this is going to suck for you. It's not wrong if you tried something new and it doesn't work. We're going to end later today, as Nikki said, with some really tactical, actionable takeaways, and some of them are not yet tested. So we're going to be finding out a lot in the coming months of what worked and what didn't. So with that said, people really saw an opportunity, and we saw this globally, that it wasn't just a time for experimentation and agility, but also maybe we can try some things that we always wanted to try, and this can be the opportunity, so-called not letting the crisis go to waste. We can experiment. And here were some of the comments that people gave about how this might actually improve recruiting because we've had to make these changes that nobody was quite brave enough to make in the past. A lot of what we're developing, we hope can be used in the future. I'm part of a team we're calling the New Reality Team. I love that terminology. Last year, we changed our model so that we weren't looking to recruit a certain number of students from target schools. Instead, we changed to the idea of target sources, like handshake campaigns. So in some ways here, you can see that the way we even talk about recruiting could shift because of this situation. And finally, a crisis is a horrible thing to waste. This is an opportunity to systematize better processes over certain topics that have remained thorny over the past few decades. Maybe we're getting a little bit of an opportunity to experiment. Sometimes the conversations have been fun around that. And not to downplay the unrest in the world, and certainly in the United States, not to downplay the tragic illnesses and death, but in our daily jobs, there are some opportunities to find positives and solutions that have maybe stumped us for a long time. So with those two underlining themes, the need for, themes, the need for agility in the present and the desire to use this time to maybe catapult us forward in the future, we identified 3 themes under those 2 overarching concepts. And again, we'll share some verbatims for both of those. And I'll start with the first theme, again, reminiscent of that we just talked about, that crisis drives innovation and inclusion. How can we use this time to move forward? And the first topic underneath that is many of the people we interviewed, particularly in the United States and the UK, said that more virtual recruiting might actually benefit employers' diversity and inclusion efforts and also create more opportunities for students to be exposed to different kinds of opportunities. This gives us the opportunity I've been yearning for, to have a more inclusive top of the funnel. This movement away from target schools, from only inviting certain campuses or students to attend, but really opening up more opportunity at the very beginning of the process. Another interviewee said increased virtual recruiting will create an avenue for companies that don't have large teams and can't go to every campus. We did primarily speak to large organizations, but they were very mindful that some smaller organizations, some smaller employers might benefit from the changes happening now. This was an interview with a US company conducted in June after more of the Black Lives Matter protests had been underway. And this person said, our CEO spoke to our interns about what was happening regarding the racial justice movement and indicated what she was proactively doing in the organization. And then we made sure the interns, who are obviously all working virtually, were included on the organizational email. So they were included in our position and everyone had an opportunity to be part of that future. And everyone had a voice. That was very well received. And I think we'll continue to include them in how we choose to respond, because we want them to see themselves as members of the organization. I don't know about you, but 20 plus years ago when I was starting my career, I can't imagine feeling that as an intern, I had a voice on such important issues. And I think that could be a really positive outcome of the current situation. And finally, I really wanted to share this example that we heard from the APAC region. When we mentioned diversity and inclusion and equity in our interviews, we didn't specify how to define that. And in the APAC region, that often led to conversations among employers about people with disabilities. It was a much bigger issue there, and perhaps that's something that we'll see growing in the US and the UK. And here was an example of an APAC comment. I've noticed over the past 6 months, more candidates are more comfortable disclosing a disability. We've never had that before. They'll tell us they need extra time or support or coaching. There's not as much stigma as before, particularly with cognitive disabilities. There's been a massive shift since the bushfires in Australia and COVID-19. Everyone has come together as a community and is more empathetic. We've created a safer environment to speak up if candidates are not okay and need support. There was a lot of discussion as well among employers about how virtual recruiting could impact introverted students. Certainly could impact students of lower socioeconomic classes who might not have the technology access or be in a quiet environment to conduct those interviews. Empathy being a really key piece of the diversity and inclusion conversation. The next topic, as I mentioned earlier in a little bit of a preview, is that COVID has really been accelerating recruiting strategies and trends that were already underway. I can't tell you how many people said, I was thinking about this already, and now we're going to do it. And here's some examples of that. We were already looking for ways, especially for remote campuses where it was really difficult to travel, to do things more virtually. This has fast forwarded that. We've already done the work to transition to a virtual recruiting model. The opportunity now is to get better at becoming even bigger experts in the virtual space. Almost everyone we spoke to had been doing some things virtually, but they didn't really feel that they had the best practices. So we collected some examples of that we'll share. And finally, on this topic, this is all a pilot. This should inform our ability to create some change in the organization. People are really leaning in right now, and we have leadership's attention and their willingness. This was also common across the globe, that recruiters and particularly D&I professionals, DE&I professionals felt that they now had a seat at the very highest levels of leadership, and they wanted to make sure they maximize that opportunity to get their key messages and priorities across to senior leadership, so that elevation of the recruiting and DE&I functions was a really important topic and really perceived as a positive. So Nikki, I'll pass it over to you to talk about the next themes.
Thanks, Lindsay. Many organisations are already applying lessons learned from the global financial crisis, and many of the global membership bodies that we spoke to referenced research that they had conducted in 2008 and data that they had gathered in 2009. One here, we learned our lesson that a hiring freeze after the global financial crisis had a negative impact for years to come. One of my clients mentioned to me recently, she worked for a global bank. She said it took them 5 years to ever recover their talent pipeline for VPs in banking. Another quote here, whenever we've stopped hiring, it has killed our programs 5 years later. We don't have trained talent in the marketplace, and we don't have the bench in place for the important positions. So critical that people keep investing so that they've got the talent pipeline for the future. My worry for students is there is evidence this happened in the financial crash. And this is a good one for you working on campus or in universities. They assume the labour market is dead and nobody is recruiting, so they just totally disengage. 50% of UK entry-level employers didn't fill all of their vacancies in 2009. They weren't getting people to apply to those jobs. It won't be easy for students this year and next year, but it might be better than they think. And I think this is a big reminder for those of us who support students and also allow them to know about the range of jobs that are available, even if it's not the first choice, that there are often jobs, even in a crisis, that go unfilled. And then finally, the tone among employers, however, is quite different from the financial crash. There's not an industry to blame. The pandemic is such a huge social issue and health issue for everybody. Those that are going out aggressively selling and not going down well, people have to be very careful with their tone. So there's this balance of wanting to continue to recruit the talent, but doing it in a way that's sensitive. However, what we did see is that so many more employers, and Lindsay will go on to discuss this, have been very empathic with the students, and we really hope that continues. And then recruiters see this as an opportunity to win over talent. So one of the things that made Lindsay and I smile distantly from across different countries was the extent to which how recruiters who were switched on to thinking that actually there were pockets of talent that were going to become available because of the crisis were going to go for it. So one recruiter, we know some people rescinded offers and cancelled programs, and there is talent out there right now. Opportunistically, I can get really great talent because someone else was short-sighted and stopped hiring. I will. And there were a number of organisations really looking for optimising those opportunities. There is a network of employers to support students. I'm in touch with other recruiters to see what companies are which companies are actually rescinding offers and not going to hire, then I can refocus on getting their students. One recruiter from another company told me all their offers were being rescinded, so she is sending them to us. And one of the great things, despite the kind of competition for talent, is that because there is this collaboration between recruiters, there is this willing, if I have to rescind an offer, that I will tell somebody in my network so that they can try to pick up on this talent and move talent pools across sometimes different industries as well. So there's almost a self-configuration between the recruiters to support. Lindsey, back to you.
Thanks, Nikki. So we did not interview any higher education professionals, but we did speak to employers about career services and how university career centers might pivot or are communicating their pivots to employers. So we wanted to share some of that feedback. A good number of career centers had been in a reactive state before the pandemic when it came to the final months of graduation. During COVID, many became proactive to support students in every which way they possibly could. For example, career centers at large campuses sent personalized messages to every graduating student. Some went as far as to use their CRMs, their customer relationship management systems, to put details about what they've been talking to those students about. So incredibly customized communications. Those were really successful strategies. Students were engaging back in numbers those career centers haven't seen before. I should say we did speak to some of the professional associations in the career services and employment industry in the US, in Australia, in South Africa, and in the UK. And some of this feedback comes from those professional bodies as well as employers. Here's another one. In a more virtual world, instead of universities running their own individual career fairs, I think what you're going to see is a lot more collaboration across universities, like regional hubbing and national coalitions. So just as employers would be collaborating more in a more virtual world, career centers and universities would be doing the same. And finally, career services needs to change the career fair model. I'm okay with a career fair virtually or in person, but make it focused on more meaningful connections for the employer and the students. It needs to be more tailored. Let's keep that going even when we can go back to campus. One size fits none on virtual career fairs. So there was really a desire among employers for a more customized, more bespoke, more expertise-based role for career centers to really know their students and how employers can reach them, which I thought was really positive and has certainly been in the conversation for quite a while before now. So that's the last topic in our first theme. Let's move on to our second theme. And this came out so strongly in every single person we spoke to around the globe. No employer imagines or wants a world that is entirely virtual. Everybody wants some combination where the technology gets more human and the human interactions are combined with that human and virtual touch. So here's some examples of why that personal touch is so important and how people want to integrate it. Many say it comes from the candidates. Candidates tell us the thing that makes our firm different is our people. They enjoy the interaction during the recruiting process. That's a competitive advantage. We don't want to lose that. Personal connection is what gets us across the line. So many people talked about using virtual recruiting tools earlier in the process to widen that funnel and to narrow down the playing field, but that what really closes the deal is those personal connections. Next, I think a face-to-face part is vital. We want to meet them, the candidates, and create that connection because it's too impersonal online. We don't see their passion as much and don't get to know them. Face-to-face will come back, but not in as large a way as it used to be. The face-to-face element of recruiting will probably be quite small, maybe as the final recruitment day. And finally, this was really interesting. It's easy to recruit for the super sexy roles that all students want, but then there are roles we have to do a lot of work to get interest in, such as working in our credit call center. those are going to be really hard to sell if we can't be on the quad to build relationship with students and sell those jobs. So this particular recruiter was in the retail industry and said that there are some jobs that are just a really tough sell, and the way they fill them is by truly building relationships with students to convince them why this is a good place to start their career. They weren't concerned about filling the buyer jobs or the investment banking analyst jobs, but there's such a large swath, and Nikki mentioned this in her opening remarks, of roles that students might not know about or might not think is the right place to begin. And there's a concern among employers of how to communicate those roles without that personal face-to-face element.
Thanks, Lindsay. So this is one of my favourite parts of the research, not because I'm anti-technology, running a technology company, but I've run a lot of some of the old-fashioned things as well. So we're seeing a little bit of a return to the artisan and the boutique here. We might actually see a return to some old-fashioned recruiting practices. And indeed, people referenced from an assessment perspective, we're putting more emphasis into phone interviewing. It helps build connection more than if they record a video. And I think it's incredible that in these times of actually so many things going virtual and technology playing a great role in support of that, the good old-fashioned phone being an intimate way to communicate. We're going back to doing some really old-fashioned things, like using people who had good experiences in the summer to recruit the students they know. So also going back to word of mouth. And then another favorite of mine, because it plays to my positive psychology roots, remote internships this summer. Lindsay and I have heard the most incredible examples, such amazing creativity. Long may it continue. There is a book just in some of the things that have happened this summer. Remote internships this summer are a great testing ground, as Lindsay mentioned, for building excellent virtual experiences and random acts of kindness. So this is our kind of top list of the ones we heard. We asked interns what their favorite song is and built a Spotify playlist. That little thing of bringing the spark of connectivity and excitement, I wonder whether it will encourage us to be a little bit more human in the future. This particular quote went viral. Recruiters were using that all across the globe. All incoming interns have had access to an app personalized to them, which says, we're excited about your arrival. It gives them homework to do, like videos to record, and other ways to stay connected with us and each other. We're giving summer interns experiences they can record on their phones away from their computer. They like taking a video of your apartment as an MTV Cribs. We're going virtual Iron Chef, work from home Olympics, Family Feud, and board game nights. There were a lot of pizza nights, virtual pizza nights with interns. Our team is sending our new hires a graduation gift, individual medals featuring a Martin Luther King Jr. quote about resilience on the back. We want to recognize them on this journey. And that was actually from a very strong technology company who wanted to send something meaningful to mark an occasion which actually was going to pass in a different way this year. One of the things I love about random acts of kindness is that they impute positive emotional resource, which will feed students' resilience. So I hope this can continue on campuses and with organisations into the fall.
Thanks, Nikki. This is such a good segue into our third and final topic, which was a real focus on culture, empathy, and mental health among the employers. Some of you who might know my work know that I've studied millennials and generational differences for a long time, and I've spent a lot of time countering a lot of the negative connotations associated with millennials and now their younger counterparts, Gen Z. That was not present at all in these conversations. There was such an empathy for the moment that young people, and all of us, but young people in particular, are experiencing. And I love that random act of kindness around graduation, because so many employers said, I remember my graduation and my first day of work as being such a high point. And I feel so much empathy for these young people not having that experience. What can we do for them? So it was often a very personal place. Many of the people we spoke to are parents as well and had family members, children graduating. So that perspective of empathy was really powerful. And I thought such a change from some of the negative narratives that we've heard about younger generations for a long time. So let's look at some specifics of this theme on empathy. And Nicky previewed this, that there is incredibly high empathy for the class of 20, but also a growing concern for the class of 2021. And I know this is something that's been discussed a lot on the NACE town halls, and we heard this in our interviews globally as well, although in APAC it was often referring to 2022 as well. It was interesting to see how much of a parental lens came through in our discussions around interns and campus recruiting. So many of our leaders have kids in this situation. That was not just referring to recruitment leaders, but CEOs, law firm partners and managing partners. There was really an understanding deeply among very senior leaders of how critical this transition from college to career was for everybody and how the class of 2020 would be affected. Compassion has been an absolute key. We know the start of their career is something special, and we've spent a lot of time thinking about how to make it rewarding to start virtually. I'm concerned about international students. By the way, these interviews were conducted before the recent news about H-1B visas, but this was also a global theme. Obviously, the rates of international student mobility are quite different around the globe, but we heard this in every country we spoke to, concern about international students. This particular interview was from Australia. They're quite significantly impacted. They can't work and can't get government assistance. There is not much we can do. There was a real concern and real feeling of hopelessness or helplessness among a lot of employers because the visa issues and international mobility issues were out of their hands. And finally, my fear is the class of 2021 and the limited recruiting windows they may have because we don't know what fall is going to look like on most campuses. There is more a personal feeling of empathy about the class of 2020, not ending their senior year or having commencement, but I think the biggest impact is going to be on 2021. We heard this from conversations with employers and certainly with career services professionals that this happened in the global financial crisis, that the class of 2008 kind of snuck through and was okay, but there was just a fallout and tremendous difficulty for the class of 2009. So there's a lot of concern that that will happen again.
Thanks, Lindsay. And then a lot of time has been paid to an increased focus on training managers to onboard particularly the interns, but they're looking now for graduates and hires beyond, so that their jobs, let me start that again, training managers to onboard new hires so that their jobs and the culture of the organisation can really be shared, even when you're not starting in situ in a face-to-face environment. We have a keen focus on making sure that our managers are prepared with resources to onboard new hires and making sure the new hires get assimilated. We are placing a lot of emphasis on the importance of belonging. This is far beyond a new employee's tech needs. How can we make sure we're creating a culture that welcomes them in, even though we're not together in person? This is a very hot topic. And this continues to be a hot topic into the fall, and it extends beyond interns and graduates for everybody onboarding. And it's all those things that are implicit, that go unsaid, that people are trying to bring into their onboarding. But one individual, there is a fear of over-promising. My fear is when this crisis is over, the new normal will not be reflective of what the virtual cohort has come to expect. I'm worried we will go so overboard that we'll not be able to continue with that. If we don't continue to show up in that way, they will be disappointed. It's the thing I'm most worried about. So what the research has really shown is that the recruiters have been paying enormous attention to the needs of the interns, of the candidates. And I think probably everyone on this call would say how fantastic that is. but then a concern that it won't carry on into business as usual. And I think we massively hope the things that have gone down well can have some longevity. I think this one's yours, Lindsey.
Thank you, Nikki. Yes, thanks. Just to reiterate Nikki's point that people said, oh, we're doing all these amazing things. We're training managers. You know, I just had to really hold back during the interviews to not say, why weren't you doing all of this before? It's such a good idea and it's so important. Please keep it. And I would say on that topic is just the enormous increase in attention towards mental health, absolutely as a top of mind priority for leadership at all levels. And here we really expanded beyond students and entry-level employees to all people in an organization. And just to talk about mental health for a moment, again, it was really striking how mental health was really considered a diversity, equity, and inclusion issue more in the APAC region. That struck me. And I had been thinking for years that this was about to just explode onto the scene as a top priority in the United States and in the UK. And that's exactly what we are seeing due to the work from home situation in many organizations. In every address our senior partner, this was a law firm, has done globally during the crisis, the #1 topic has been around mental health. We need to ensure that our incoming people know that we're offering mental health and well-being support. It was absolutely critical to employers that the students they were bringing in knew what mental health support was available from day one. And I have never seen that kind of attention paid. I think because of the rise in accessing mental health services that we've seen on campus, about a 30% rise in recent years, this was coming head on to organizations, whether they knew it or not. And I think the awareness of this has skyrocketed, which will be incredibly important and valuable for the Gen Zs who are coming into companies. While everyone is working from home, every single employee, this was a financial services organization, has to be spoken to and tracked every week. We're hyper-focused on connectivity and having empathy for people who are anxious, overworked, or not near family. Communication today is showing the candidates care. The way you treat people, they will remember. You can't not pay attention to the relationships. That is what you can't ignore. There was a real understanding among employers who brought it up, we didn't ask about it, that the way people are treated during this time will give them an impression of your organization forever. And so even if you were furloughing employees or rescinding internships or doing layoffs, how that was conducted would make a very lasting impression on the candidates. And so there was a lot of attention paid to how to have these difficult conversations, how to communicate with students, and even how to communicate with those who were not given offers. And I think the level of attention and care that was paid was really pretty extraordinary.
And then just coming to some of our final themes now, an area I was particularly interested in as someone studying often core strengths and skills were the quotes that came on around new strengths emerging. So new strengths and training needs are being identified because of the crisis. What I can tell you is in a crisis, this does happen. There is many data to show that new strengths emerge at these times. Losing that early experience of being in an organization, office politics, dealing with conflict, getting stuff done. Students may not experience that in the same way when working remotely. I have a worry that this year and possibly next year cohorts will miss out in that long term on those skills. I do think from a generational perspective, this cohort is going to come out with different strengths than any other group, particularly resilience. At Cappfinity, we study group strengths. We can already see generationally a different set of strengths emerging at these times. And then finally, and this has been a particularly impactful quote for Lindsey and I and the team at Cappfinity, hopefully this will help them build resilience and make them more flexible and adaptable. Resilience is always what people say grads are missing when we run surveys. What companies would like them to have before they start. this situation happening in their final year of uni might naturally increase their resilience, or it may go the other way. Students may come in with less resilience. Hopefully, they will build their resilience, but think of the negative impact on mental health when you can't see a way out. And we feel this deeply at Cappfinity with our mission of strengthening the world. And we wanted to share with you exclusively as a membership group at NACE, 2 initiatives which we would really invite your participation with and support of. So first of all, one of the things we would like to give to all of you is complimentary access to our Strengths Profile tool, which will allow you to be able to give access to interns, graduates and students Strengths Profile for free until July 31st. And you'll be able to join hundreds of thousands of people who've used this tool to explore career decisions. It also allows resilience to develop and mental health and well-being to flourish when we're able to use our strengths. And then our second initiative is the launch of the Cappfinity virtual experience and evaluation. We have given a lot of thought at Cappfinity of what resource do we have and what experience do we have over the last 15 years to develop graduates and interns. And we've decided to bring all of that learning into one place and launch late summer in the US, a chance for students to showcase their best selves with industry job simulations, which will help them build resilience, it will help them develop their strengths, and it will also help employers evaluate with insight their best matched diverse talent. The benefit of this is that any student will be able to complete this experience and evaluation anywhere across the US, and it doesn't matter whether they're on campus or not. So if you are interested in supporting either of these initiatives, then please do register your interest at www.2020strong.global. We would love to have you join us in support of this mission. So finally, we want to talk about the actionable ideas that we have for you and that we hope you'll be able to use in the coming weeks and months.
Thanks, Nikki. And I just want to reiterate what you said. There are a lot of questions on people's minds. How will students fare? Will they build resilience and be stronger for this crisis? Or will they be damaged for a long time? And I just deeply believe, as Nikki does, that we have a role to play in that as professionals, as supporters of young people. So I'm going to share the first 5 of our actionable ideas that were shared by employers. Nikki will share the final 5, and then we would love to answer your questions. So number 1, one employer is creating a virtual toolkit. We're creating a manager toolkit for managers of entry-level talent. How many touch points they should have with employees, how to advise an intern to ask questions, etc. We're trying to be very prescriptive in the assigning and evaluating of work. We're level setting how to build virtual relationships and providing icebreakers and activities. They are not leaving it up to chance how managers manage remotely. They're providing guidance. Number 2, the rhythm of daily connection. All managers of summer interns are having a daily virtual morning huddle. We want to train the interns to work normal hours and level set expectations of the work. We also want them to have FaceTime with someone from our company first thing every morning. Don't leave that up to chance. Number 3, mentoring conversations at scale. In the past, interns would have had one mentor with a budget to take them to lunch or coffee. For the remote internship, we've assigned every intern to 4 mentors at different levels, including partners. They'll have at least 45-minute virtual conversations with each. This conversation also expanded to Black students and students of color, that providing more support now was a top priority. Number 4, There are phone calls and video calls taking place with clients because of the crisis. Partners are placing added focus on making sure associates are on those calls. So more virtual apprenticeship, more inviting of interns and entry-level talent to participate in those calls so that they can learn and hopefully build those communication, soft skills, and office politics skills by observing when they can and doing that more often. And number 5, everything we're doing for our intern program virtually will be recorded for playback so they can participate at any time over 4 weeks that works for their situation. An understanding that some people are in situations where they can only use the technology in their home at certain points of the day, that some people were working part-time or taking care of sick family members. So a real honoring of the fact that people are in many different situations right now and that this organization wanted to support that. Nikki.
Thanks, Lindsay. So then our 6th point, a commitment to over communicating. We are doing company-wide town halls way more frequently. We would normally do them once or twice a year, and now we're doing them every 2 weeks. It's good for the employee to hear directly from leadership and for the senior people to see employees of all levels are dialed in. And this is something that I think the over communicating at these times is absolutely key, to make sure that the interns and students can hear from people. Otherwise they fill in their own blanks. Check in confidentially. We created a confidential survey to ask every employee how you feel from a well-being perspective about possibly returning to the office and what would make you feel more comfortable. We want to have a sense of how people feel. And I think this speaks to the focus on mental health, the level of empathy that employers are showing, and also really acknowledging the rights of different individuals in these times. Open doors to senior leadership. As the global head of recruiting, I would normally go to a couple of live early ID events to meet 20 or 50 intern students, pre-intern students, but next week we're going to deliver a new virtual experience to a much larger audience to get our message out more broadly. And I think this is one of the big benefits. Senior leaders still want to be involved, they still want to speak to students, but actually they can speak to a far greater range of students and role model to many more communities, hopefully as well. Make learning fun, I would add, and engaging. We have a working prototype of a virtual board game. Candidates said it gave them a better understanding of our industry and was more fun than case studies. And we did hear a little bit, and I feel bad saying this to all of you, but people being over Zoomed. So the chance to do things differently and to make them engaging and creative is key. And then finally, collaborate and support. I want to team up with other companies in my industry or local area to make the virtual experience positive for students this fall. Let's come together as companies so a student can talk to 3 or 4 companies at once or 3 or 4 industries at once. I think we have to be open-minded going into the fall and help students not to be inundated by a swirling of different organisations competing for their time. And it speaks to the level of collaboration that Lindsay has acknowledged through the research and also what we're trying to achieve with our V for Students programme. So you will hear another voice as we go into the Q&A section. Jeannie, I know, has been busily writing down questions in chat, and she is going to ask some of them to Lindsay and I on your behalf.
Thank you, Nikki. So absolutely, please feel free to continue sending those questions through the chat. But the first question that we had was around, the point that was made about more diversity at the top of the funnel and having more sort of virtual events. Can you answer the question specifically around the digital divide that we're seeing across the country, and what are people doing specifically to reach those candidates that are on the other side of the digital divide?
I'm happy to take that one first. Yeah. Sure. So I'm very, very concerned about this. And we asked this question specifically. And I will tell you that one of the answers we heard from a lot of employers is, we put it out there. And we said, if anybody needs support, if anybody needs a technology, we're happy to provide it. And many of the employers said 0 students took advantage of that. And so I'm really concerned that students were embarrassed or worried that it would hurt their chances to ask for that additional support. And we don't know certainly why that's the answer, but that was what a lot of employers told us. It was very interesting. In Australia, high schools actually give every student in the country a laptop, so they didn't have to worry about that. There are also certain schools that were providing that technology and allowing students to keep that with them. So it wasn't always an issue, but I wish I had a better answer. Nikki, I'll pass it to you if you have anything to add, but many employers were making that possible and finding that students were sometimes not taking advantage.
Thanks, Lindsay. And I think just more work to be done by employers who want to support students so that everyone can have access. So I think it will continue. For everything that we do at Cappfinity, there's a piece around having mobile access, but clearly you can't run a virtual internship over months on a mobile phone. So it's a challenge that I think we have to lean into continually as we go forward for as long as we spend this amount of time working virtually.
Wonderful. And we have another question specifically around the point about career fairs and how can we make them more personal? Because there was a point about expanding and sort of hubbing and bringing organizations together. So Nikki, can you speak a little bit more about that?
I think one of the things that we heard and we were really encouraged by, and it speaks to that last quote, is that industries want to collaborate. And they almost want to put their differences aside in terms of looking for the same talent, but go out potentially as an insurance sector all together to represent all of the jobs and all of the opportunity that exists within that sector, because that will be good for all. And I think if that type of approach is demonstrated more, even by one sector who goes forward in that way, and a number of universities who are willing to give it a try, that will then open the floodgates for more people to collaborate, come together, and not just compete for the students.
Fabulous. And we also have a question specifically around V. Can you tell us about access to students? Will there be a fee?
Yeah, no fee for V. There's probably a strap line there somewhere. It will be completely open access for the students. We will be looking for the recruiters to make a small annual contribution to having their job simulations featured in the product. Job simulation is a type of mini virtual work experience we run with loads of recruiters. And it's very much about allowing the student to be to get that self-insight, get that resilience, and no intention to charge.
Fabulous. And there's another question. I know in the chat there's lots of questions about, can we post where the free resources are? I've just put it into the chat feature, but if you search for 2020strong.global, you'll get a link to the Free Strengths profile, as well as registering interest to Cappfinity V. We do have another question just around the research, and if we have spoken to any third-party talent recruitment partners, partnering with employers to source DEI students, and my answer to that is we're continuing to expand on the research. And so Lindsay or Nikki, I don't know if you want to add to that. And actually, there was a second part. I apologize. And so programs, they're working with education programs who do not have the access to desired employer, or they're not typically in those target schools. That was an important point that I left out. So
the one thing I'd say, and I think Lindsay will have a fuller response, is that when we ask questions about diversity and inclusion, we heard more organisations talking about using third parties to source diverse talent as a way of ensuring that they were included in their pipelines. This was pre-Black Lives Matters. I think Lindsay and I, from the conversations we've had with employers since, that will definitely continue to be a focus, and it will be a greater focus, rightly so. I don't know, Lindsay, if you'd want to add to that.
Yeah, I second that. It was not nearly enough of the focus of the earlier conversations as it probably would be if we conducted them 2 weeks later. We are absolutely following up on the research, as Nikki said, and I think the answers that we'll get will be a lot more thorough and a lot more specific than they even might have been a couple of weeks ago. Thank you for raising the issue.
And another question around how, in terms of how employers are using schools and career centers that offer sort of access to all versus more targeted engagement. And I know this is something we certainly talk about quite a bit. And it sounds as if employers are preferring engagement that's targeted to students within a particular major experience. Any sort of thoughts that you wanted to share around that? And Nikki, do you want to start with that?
Well, I'm gonna let Lindsey share first, and then I'm gonna give a very British response.
Oh, I can't wait to hear the British response. I'm learning a lot of Britishisms now after watching Nikki. So the answer is, I think it's going in both directions. I think there's a widening of the funnel at the top, but then I think that it kind of goes to this Zoom fatigue and to the earlier question of how do you make it personal when you're opening job fairs, virtual career fairs to more students. So what going back to one of the ideas that Nikki brought up in how things are becoming more old-fashioned, a lot of employers are going to double down on things like campus ambassadors with students who are going to tell them, these are the organizations you need to be involved with. This is how you need to customize your message for these students or these majors. So I think there's a widening at the top of the funnel, but then a lot more personalization through communications, through event sponsorship, through student relationships, and through career centers. So I also think that employers are going to rely on career centers to help them customize their messages as much as possible. But I think it really is going both ways.
One of the things, and this is my British response, one of the things that we've had in the UK for a number of years, endorsed often by government, is what's referred to as blind screening, where none of the information around what you majored in, the university you attended, any particular things that you've studied, that is not included in any part of the application process. Neither is anything that would really justify a level of academics. So we've had worked with organisations, large corporate employers, who won't make decisions based on the class of the degree that the students get, but they will evaluate the talent on criteria that they deem to be predictive in the role. And what that has done is we have investment banking clients who have hired people who've done sports psychology majors, and they are really embracing a wide and diverse range of campuses and schools, and it's forming to be a great source of untapped talent for the organizations that are taking a kind of a wider view of talent, and virtual tools really helps facilitate that. So something that we've been experienced a positive effect in the UK, and I think possibly COVID will project some of that in the US.
Wonderful. And we have another question that's come up in a couple of different ways, but what can we do as from a college perspective do to prepare students?
Can I take that one?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you would fight me for it if you didn't. So here we go.
That's what I'm writing a new book about. This is a whole session in itself of how do we prepare students for what is happening right now. Obviously, it's a huge question for career centers. Two key themes, so that I don't talk for the rest of the time. One is there was such an interesting conversation, as we mentioned, around jobs that students maybe would not have considered in the past that are going to be available. So I think exposing students to the wide range and perhaps different range of opportunities. I was doing a webinar at a community college, and I talked about, you're adding all these jobs at grocery stores. Well, it's not just frontline people at checkout, it's the marketing people, and it's the back office people, and it's the HR people at these organizations. So I think broadening students' understanding with education about the variety of opportunities that are going to be out there. And then I think real hardcore training in how to network and communicate your story and sell yourself virtually. A lot of employers want to partner with career centers on that, to say, this is how to succeed in a virtual interview. This is how to handle what we are going to do. So I think think those two topics, although we could talk more and I would love to after the fact, please be in touch, whoever asked that question, but those are the two, I think, top line issues: exposure to the different kinds of jobs available and really increased preparation for a virtual recruiting scene. Thank you.
And the one bit I'd add is around strengths as well. And in discovering your strengths, you may also find careers that would be a brilliant fit for you that don't necessarily relate 100% to what you've majored in. And I spend a lot of time later on with individuals, maybe at career change moments, when they say to me, well, I was good at numbers, so I was praised at school, and then I went on to study accountancy and I had to become an accountant. And actually, when I look at their strengths profile, they've got innovation and entrepreneurship and these wide range strengths, which probably could have led to a lot of careers as well. So I'm a massive advocate, particularly at these times when people have to maybe pivot and think differently if their first choice isn't right, that maybe there is a strengths-based second or third choice for you as well.
Fabulous. And we are at the top of time, but I do know that many of our panelists are asking, how can we continue to connect and learn more? So I've just sent the link to 2020 Strong to connect. And also in the follow-up, we'll be including information of how to connect with Lindsey and Nikki, but certainly feel free to share just some closing thoughts.
Yeah, thank you everybody for your attendance. And Lindsey and I would love to hear if there are any angles. This research is deep, so if there are other things that you would like to hear of, then please share with us, and we would love to tell you more.
Thank you to Nace. Thank you to all of you for taking the time to be with us. Please do follow up. We would love to keep in touch with all of you. Thank you, Jeannie, for moderating, and thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Lindsey.
Thank you.
Thank you to our presenters for a very informative session, and thank you participants for attending today's session. This officially concludes the webinar, and you may now sign off.